Hey everybody, welcome ladies and gentlemen. I'm Charles E. Smith Jr. and this is our Inside Sports production of Talkin Hockey. And without further ado, let me go ahead and start to bring in my special guest. Actually, he has signed on now to be my permanent co-host here on Talkin Hockey, at least through this season. Then in the off season, if he wants some type of ridiculous signing bonus, we're going to have to talk about that. But Lonnie Schwartz of Hockey54.com, who mixes fanboy enthusiasm along with true hockey knowledge, create some of the best interviews you'll find anywhere. Just go to Hockey54.com and you can follow Lonnie at the Schwartz54. So here he comes, all the way live from Toronto, none other than Lonnie Schwartz. Lonnie, what's happening out there?
Doing all right, Charles. I'm doing all right. Injury update for me. I may have a solution to my injury problems. I might be able to play hockey again sooner than I thought.
All right, perfect. Well, you know, talking about hockey, and we're talking hockey, and it's NHL. Let's go ahead and lay things out. We're going to, of course, talk about all the trade deadline things. We got the CBA coming up this summer. We'll touch on that. And also the issue of, shall we call it the C word, contraction. We'll get into that later on in the program. But right now, we're going to talk about, let's go ahead, trade deadline stuff. Eastern Conference.
Yeah, trade deadline we touched on last week, right?
We did, yes, sir.
And who we're thinking would be moving, who we think would be buyers and sellers. And now it's move it or lose it and prove it and, well, see if the pudding proves it true, too.
Well, let's just talk about a couple of players now. What about, let's go to Ottawa. What about Jason Spezza? What's going on with him over there?
Well, I don't want to mark him off in trade talk. I want to talk about Jason Spezza just from a pure standpoint that, wow, Jason Spezza has shown that he can play a full season of hockey at the highest of levels. I mean, right now, he's got 65 points in 61 games. And if I'm not mistaken, he is fourth in league scoring. Fourth in league scoring, not too far off the mark from Malkin, Stamkos, and Giroux. And for years, the knock on Spezza has been that he's not defensive-minded. Well, I always defer to the Pavel Bure argument. Pavel Bure didn't even know what goaltender was playing in net for his own team. So Jason Spezza, to knock him as an incomplete player, he's showing a lot of critics this year that his defense may not be top-notch. He'll never be up for the Selke. But this is a guy who stayed true to his team in Ottawa, and they were talking the other day on television. I'm listening, is he up for the Hart? And I'm like, Jason Spezza, Hart Trophy. And just looking at what he's accomplishing this year and what the team has done, Ottawa, a team that nobody, and if anybody can step up and say they were going to make the playoffs this year, I'd like to know who you are right now. If anybody said Ottawa was going to make the playoffs, then you're a superstar prognosticator, because everyone counted them out, and the cornerstone behind that is clearly Jason Spezza this year, healthy and putting up more than a point a game.
All right, perfect. And maybe things are shifting from Daniel Alfredsson to Jason Spezza at this point. So when you have that changing of the guard, maybe it's becoming more Spezza's team than Alfredsson's team?
Could be the case, because Alfredsson is definitely not getting any younger, and obviously since the beginning of the season, when people were speculating that he may want to get traded to a contender, well, newsflash, everyone, Ottawa is looking like, well, if they make the playoffs, it's anybody's game to win. They could be a contender. So looks like Alfredsson's happy to stay around in Ottawa until he, gets old and gray. Mind you, he might have some gray hairs popping in already. And when you have a guy like Carlson on the blue line, how's that hurting? An all-star defenseman 2 years running now? Not bad.
There you go. A little gray, but not Ron Francis gray, but just a few grays here and there.
Not Brad Marsh gray.
But with the helmet. Okay, so what about the, let's talk New Jersey Devils, too. Barely, they missed the playoffs last year after a pretty good run there at the end of the season, but they had dug too big a pit in the first 3 quarters of the season. How about the Devils over there?
Hottest team in the National Hockey League next to the Phoenix Coyotes. They're 8-1-1 in their last 10 games. They've won 4 in a row, including last night where they took on the Toronto Maple Leafs, and well, they won on a bit of a fluky goal, but still, fact remains is that's another team that you almost don't know how they're doing it beyond Parise and Kovalchuk, but Patrick Elias, who's been in the league for quite some time, is again showing that he's not going away, and he's still contributing. Peter Sikora, Dinas Zubris, where's he coming from again? This guy's been in the league for the better part of 10 years, and, you know, he's been a good contributor for most of the teams. But this year, he's really stepping it up. So, Dinas Zubris? I mean, come on. Who's going to bank on him to be part of the backbone of your team? But obviously something's right for him in New Jersey.
Exactly.
So,
and Dinas
it has
Zubris,
been for a little while.
And Zubris, I watched him when he came up with Philadelphia, and he was really a phenom when he came up. I forget, he would squat something like 500 pounds or something ridiculous like that. But he was one who always I felt was had underperformed, and all the teams.
Well, yeah, he got traded to Montreal in a big trade, and people in Montreal were expecting great things from him, and it was. Never mind, no flash. There wasn't a fizzle or a flash or anything that began with the letter F other than maybe failure.
Exactly. All right, so the Devils are doing well. Do they need to? Would you see them making any type of a move here at the deadline? Now, of course, Zach Parise he's been mentioned in trade talks since the offseason. And one of the popular things we have him coming out here to possibly to the LA Kings. But looking at the team now, looking at Parise's situation, do you see him staying there throughout the season, or maybe is there a possibility of a little blockbuster deal and Parise maybe going somewhere?
You'd have to see, it's 0.5% of a possibility that he gets traded because of the way New Jersey's been playing. And I know last week we talked about somebody needing to step in and become the number one goaltender eventually when Martin Brodeur retires. Martin Brodeur has now been on a tear since the All-Star break. He's showing that with a little bit of new equipment, he's able to keep the pucks out a little bit better and keep himself, I guess, a little healthier because he's not having to stretch a 34-inch Heaton out there anymore. Sherwood, I know everyone's going to go, he wears Sherwood. They're actually Heaton designed pads from when he broke into the league. But point is that he's showing that at 39 years of age, he's still ready to compete, and that why would you trade away Zach Parise, arguably your best player on the team? I mean, he wears the C, and yeah, he might be a UFA, but do you make the deal now, or do you go through the playoffs, keep the chemistry together, and then wait until maybe the negotiations are coming to a total standstill come draft time, and then move him at the draft? And if you're Lou Lamoriello and you see what the chemistry is like right now for this team, it would be insane to trade away Zach Parise now. Wait until after the playoffs and see if the trade winds will blow your way. If it's right, if you can't sign him and it's close to the draft, and it comes draft day and things aren't looking good, then you make that trade. Right now, it would be stupid, and Lou Lamoriello doesn't even know what that word means.
Okay, well, one thing though about Lou Lamoriello, and as we take a look at Zach Parise here, but some say that the signing of Kovalchuk was not necessarily Lamoriello's finest moment, and in fact, I've heard also grumblings that wasn't really what he wanted to do. It was more about upper management saying that they wanted to make that move and sign Kovalchuk to that long-term big money deal, which that was really something that Lamoriello does not do when you look at his history there.
It seemed really out of character, and I mean, it looks as though it was upper management's, the ownership group's decision to get him and pay that salary, which, by the way, isn't looking to be as ridiculous as it seems right now. He is leading the team, and he's at more than a point per game clip too. What are you going to say? The guy's immensely talented. A lot of signs are showing that he's changing his game so he can play both ends of the ice and still snipe when he needs to snipe. How can you really fault the team for wanting to go after him? Because he's an exciting player.
Well,
and if we're going to talk contraction later,
you
want to have that kind of marquee player, right?
Correct. I guess it's the one-dimensional thing. So I don't want to put him all the way down there to where I put Alexei Kovalev. But I think it was that kind of a thing going on where Kovalchuk he's what I consider a luxury player. So you've already got a stacked roster. Go ahead and put this incredibly dynamic yet one-dimensional player on your team, and that'll kind of put you over the top. And that's what Kovalev was in situations where he was successful. He was on teams that were already stacked, and then he just added that one element that he adds to a team. But when you you could not build a team around someone like Kovalev, and I think that was kind of the knock on Kovalchuk as well.
Well, he's starting to show that in a system like New Jersey, he's able to contribute offensively and, without a doubt, defensively. So it may have changed the dynamic to how valuable he may be financially and to the core of a team. And maybe New Jersey hasn't made the mistake that everybody thought they have. And quite frankly, it's almost even too soon to tell, because he's his first full season in at this point, or sorry, second full season in. Look,
Exactly.
Lou Lamoriello. It's his team. It's his way most of the time, and we'll just see what he can put together to keep the Jersey Devils competitive, because he still does.
Yeah, definitely. And also you got to think that a little bit of the New Jersey style system tradition is going to rub off on Kovalev, because Kovalchuk, But yeah, and they've always done that with players like that. I've looked at New Jersey where they have rented the Alexander Mogilnys for a season and things like this. But this was the first time when they really committed to that type of a somewhat one-dimensional player for a long term. So that was where New Jersey was kind of out of their comfort zone.
And now they're with a player like that who has adopted the system and will have no choice but to keep it going long term, because he's not going to get traded with this contract unless the CBA changes dynamically and some escrow starts happening and salaries go down, the salary cap goes down. And, well, I don't know. I'm no actuary, Charles. I'm a hockey guy.
All right, so let's go ahead
we'll see how the dynamics change.
Definitely. Let's just talk a little bit of Western Conference here. Now, the Chicago Blackhawks, let's go ahead and start there. A team seemingly with all the pieces in place, but at the most important position there is, which you know what position that is, especially come playoff time, they're a little bit lacking. What do you see for the Blackhawks?
Well, we were talking about this before we went to production today, because it's all about prep work there, folks. Chicago, come on, how much better of a team do you need in front of you to succeed? And yet, time and again, there were games where I was watching Chicago play, and the first 5 shots, 3 goals are going in, and you got a goaltender change. Right. And to me, how is that acceptable? You can't rely on guys like Sharp, Kane, and of course the perennial Johnny Taves to keep your team in a game. You can't score 8 goals every game. Your goaltender needs to help you out a little bit more. And even if you go by the Ken Holland School of Management, it's good enough goaltending. Well, they don't even have good enough goaltending. And so what do you go out and do? You're not going to get Corey Schneider, because there is no way that Vancouver will accept the trade with Chicago, because the city might have a sequel to what happened in the playoffs last year, if that ever came to be. I'm putting that lightly, folks. There's not going to be another riot if there's a trade. But how do you do that? And then you look at the market out there and who you can try and get, and you look at like what we talked about last week, the 1As, the 1B goaltender situation. And a name I tossed out, and I'm not saying this is a for certain, but, and it's a big but, maybe because last week we discussed how expendable he may be because of the play of Brian Elliott.
Correct.
And how well Halak played in the playoffs a couple of years ago. Maybe Yaroslav Halak isn't going to be a big price to pay for a team like Chicago to get, and he's proven that he is a playoff performer. He's like Billy Smith, the guy who's good in the regular season. I hate saying, sorry about that, guys, but a good player, a good goaltender in the regular season, and then kicks it up that extra notch in the playoffs. And maybe if he does that again, watch out Chicago. That's way in left field, because they're both Western Conference teams, and everybody gets all in a tizzy if you trade within your conference.
Well, you know what? I have to say this about Chicago, though. Let's look at their history, and even when they won the Stanley Cup, they got a little bit lucky with Antti Niemi playing as well as he did at that time, because they had they were all in with Cristobal UA, which We all know that would have been a disaster. Cristobal Ue is pretty much Jose Teodoro light, in that he can play pretty decent during the regular season, but come playoff time, the countdown is on to when he goes belly up. And Antti Niemi comes out of nowhere and is able to provide adequate and at times big-time goaltending during that Stanley Cup run they had. So it was kind of a blind squirrel finding an acorn when Antti Niemi carried them through and was able to backstop to that Stanley Cup championship. And then what happens the next year, they could have signed Niemi for, I think, under $2 million a year and didn't do it. They just let him go.
I have no idea how or why that happened. I think what they were banking on is Corey Crawford to be the goalie of the future. And, well, his future doesn't look so bright in Chi-Town. So, yeah. I don't know. I'm willing to give patience to certain goaltenders, but this season he was given the ball. Last season he was given the ball. And Corey Crawford has not been the number one guy that they seem to need to get them well into the playoffs and play consistent, good goaltending. So my left field, and I'm talking about like beyond the stadium left field, is Yaroslav Halak. Might be the expendable guy that I don't think anybody's talked about. And if Chicago plays the cards right and they don't have to give up too much so that if they do meet in the playoffs, then they're not facing, they're not going, what did we give up to only get beaten by the guy we just traded for?
Exactly. So, and even if it was not necessarily Jaro Halak, do you see them just making a trade for some goaltender somewhere before the trade deadline?
That's the one point of weakness that Chicago's displaying. So how do you not aggressively try and go out and get a guy that will prove to be a better fit for the team, not just right now, but also long-term too? Because Crawford's not an old guy. Ray Emery, not maybe a number one goaltender like he used to be because of his hip issues and his consistency in playing.
Right.
I threw out the name Bobrovsky, but Bobrovsky right now is showing some weaknesses in a very similar environment like Philadelphia, with a strong and dynamic offense, a pretty reliable defense, but then the suspect goaltending rears its ugly head, whether it's Buzgalov or at this point Bobrovsky. So I don't know exactly who else is on the market because I'm not a GM and I don't talk to too many GMs. In fact, when I say too many, I don't talk to any of the GMs directly.
Well, you know what? When you talk about the goaltending in Philadelphia, and they seem to be in that same situation all the time. And, I just say I do love the Flyers, but it seemed like really their goaltending died along with Pelle Lindbergh way back when and I think that was 86.
Oh, boy.
It's just terrible. Pelle Lindbergh was so good, and then that brought Ron Hextall up. They made that great run into the final against Edmonton. It took them to 7 games, but they have struggled ever since that point.
Yeah, Ronnie Hextall has been that guy, and filled the gap admirably at 2 different points in Philadelphia. But you're right. You thought, I think Jeff Hackett stepped in for a little bit. Sean Burke was there for a little bit. They never seemed to have that right fit. They had John Van Beesbrook for a heartbeat.
I nicknamed him Short Side, by the way. And I'm just keeping it real. I'm just keeping it real with the Beezer.
He's a good guy. I've spoken to Beezer in the past. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I just wish he could hug the near post.
He was a quality tender at the time. So yes, the question bears repeating. How do you fix these situations? And as much as you and I and other people out there can speculate who or what would be the best fit, I don't know what to tell you, man. I mean, it's a gamble. It's always a gamble. And who do you mortgage? The big question right now is what team's going to mortgage their future for Nash, and who's going to give up who for Carter? And that pertains to the West Coast with LA's woes in goal scoring. Who do you go for?
Let's take a look at, excuse me, let me take a look at Nash and Carter. In fact, and they get talked about all the time here. Rick Nash, Jeff Carter, of course, he would be, if he came out here, he would be reunited with Mike Richards, as they had so many successful years there in Philadelphia. But Jeff Carter, Rick Nash, And plus you look at the salaries. And as I always say about last place teams, you can be last place without dragging a big salary along with you. So to me, at a certain point, it makes sense that they'd be willing to deal with Rick Nash if I believe he has a no trade clause though. If he's willing to waive it, of course.
He has no movement, although he is now waiving that to discuss possibilities of teams that he'll explore, whatever the language they want to use. He gets the final okay.
Right.
But I think, personally, that chemistry can be a big thing, and seeing that the chemistry was proven between Carter and Richards, and the gamble that you have to give up, or the amount of players that you have to give up, what's the trade-off? Is there that much of a drop-off between Carter and Nash? And the answer is probably no. You know, Nash is recognized as Columbus's franchise player. Jeff Carter is an acquisition that looks to be a bust. And maybe he's the guy like Versteeg from last year. Chris Versteeg didn't do so well in Toronto, goes to Philadelphia, does okay, lands in Florida, and now Chris Versteeg's a force again in the National Hockey League. Maybe that's what it takes for Jeff Carter, is to be in the right environment with the right player to make him a viable power forward that will contribute a ton of offense. But everybody knows that when he was in Philadelphia, whatever happens outside of the rink, I don't really care about that. It's not my position to judge a guy based on that, unless he's, done a Chris Brown or something.
Right. Well, that's
Jeff Carter on the ice is a dangerous hockey player.
And that's what I've always said when they talked about the whole Dry Island scandal or whatever it was in Philadelphia. And I said, if they're going to bring what they bring every single night like that, I don't really care. Right, as long as it stays, we're not bailing them out of jail all the time. It doesn't really matter what they do off the ice. The other one issue I might have with Carter is that, you have the whole, he's been a little bit brittle over the years, over the last couple of seasons.
There's been some injuries, yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, Andrei Markov had some really strong years in Montreal. I defer to Montreal because the team I obviously follow closely. but Andrei Markov I just made a joke that he might be flying with the team. Well, upon takeoff, his tendon might rupture. Who knows? It's one of those things where you can't just, with Carter, you can only look so far as what he'll contribute on the ice, and then maybe if he stays healthy. And there are times where he's been healthy. When he is, boy, look out.
True. And there's a lot of players that were a little injury prone and wound up having successful careers, like Brian Leetch. I remember, and to me, the epitome of Brian Leetch and his injury problems was when he got out of a cab in New York, stepped on ice, fell, and broke his ankle. That was, it's just, he was born under an unlucky star. But let's go ahead and, last few minutes here, let's talk a little bit about the CBA is coming up. We've got the showdown, the NHL versus the NHLPA. Donald Fear and Gary Bettman are going to be getting together and trying to decide the fate of the league in the immediate future. One thing that comes up when you talk about, and we were talking about in pre-production, if you're going to run this thing like it was a business, then would you have to think about contraction at some point, possibly, because you have some teams that are underperforming. And I did get this from one of the social media fans. Here was his proposal as far as what they should do to make this a financially healthy league. And what he was saying was, you fold teams, Tampa Bay, Florida, Nashville, Columbus, and Phoenix. And then you move the Islanders to Quebec City, and you move the Devils to Seattle, because the Devils are really having a problem there. And, Islanders in Quebec City, they want a team there. Seattle, from what I understand, will really support hockey. But, fold a few teams, move a few teams, come back with actually a viable business model where you're not carrying any albatrosses on the payroll, so to speak.
Well, when you say a team like Nashville, and I'll stand up for Nashville because, quite honestly, they're at 97% capacity. Okay, they have an average of 16,593 people in the stands, and their capacity at full is just over 17,000. Mm-hmm. So when you see that statistic, then you got to give a little more credence to a team like Nashville. Right. 14,000 butts and seats is the league minimum. and Nashville is now almost 3,000 seats above that league minimum threshold. But then you look at a team like Phoenix, and they're at 69%, and it's beyond comprehension how the National Hockey League's pride gets in the way of better business sense. You know, last year they were at 71% capacity, and the Islanders were a paltry 67% capacity. So,
right.
I mean, you want to look at teams that are failing. Yeah, you've got the Florida team, which, you know, besides the fact that they made the playoffs, 10 years ago now?
Right.
It's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant to hang your hat on the fact that they made the playoffs once. This is not a good market. The NHL, when they came out and said, we want to put teams in non-traditional markets like Florida and Phoenix and Tampa and Nashville has proven to be the exception to the rule. They have a winning product, and now more people are starting to come to the game. They have gradually built a strong fan base. Moving a team like Hartford to Carolina has seemed to be a mistake because since they've won the Cup, there has been a tremendous drop-off in success.
Correct.
And attendance. Florida, awful attendance. Phoenix is the bane of the National Hockey League's existence, yet they still try and go out and find owners, and it's beyond me. And this is a really complex issue because Toronto is the fourth largest metropolitan area in North America, yet there's only one hockey team, one professional hockey team. Yet, in a place like New York, you have, technically speaking, 4 teams within an hour's drive.
Correct.
That being New Jersey, Philadelphia, the Islanders, and the Rangers. That's 4 hockey teams within an hour drive. Now, of course, New York has the state of New York has the population of all of Canada. I get that. But when you have a market like Toronto that continually brags about their season's tickets and that they're sold out for lifetimes. We're talking you could be a great-grandfather by the time they have a season's ticket available for somebody to purchase. You have to say to yourself, is this a market that can sustain another team? And the question doesn't even need to fall off someone's lips before everyone unanimously, except the Toronto Maple Leafs and seemingly the National Hockey League, to say yes. It makes no sense. Quebec's problem is its volatility with its economy because of the language problem. The minute the language police rear their ugly head, all of a sudden the English businesses that came there are saying, so long, fellas, it was nice knowing you.
Right.
And that's the problem with Quebec. Yes, there is a hunger for hockey, but the volatility of the economy there is based on the fact that every so often someone says, it is not French, so you have to bug off with the French.
Right. Well, I think one other thing is, unlike some of the other leagues, sports leagues there in America, is that with the National Hockey League, a lot of the revenue is driven just by ticket sales. And as we know, the big contracts in any sport is not due to ticket sales, it's from TV contracts. And the NHL has never really been able to have a lucrative TV contract, yet they're paying out salaries, which are getting up there into the levels of the other sports that have those TV contracts. So, they cut salaries at the last time they had the lockout, they cut salaries by half, and still you have teams losing money. So there's a real problem here with the NHL.
There's a terrible problem.
Yeah.
There's a terrible problem with the NHL and how they do business. In that they keep teams that struggle at the gate. They don't have enough television revenue to spread throughout the league, which is the beauty of the NFL. They have that TV contract that dwarfs the National Hockey League's full revenue. Like the TV contract, as we explained on the phone earlier, is the NFL's contract for television dwarfs that of the entire revenue stream of the National Hockey League. And that revenue stream from television is spread throughout the league, and also the NFL has that beautiful revenue sharing for the lower end teams. Not lower end, I shouldn't say that, but a team
small
like
market.
Green Bay.
Sure.
Yeah, a small market. Green Bay, Wisconsin is not a big market. There are not a lot of people who live in Green Bay. In fact, I think the entire population and surrounding areas go to Lambeau Field once a week. And then everybody's not home. No wonder thefts are so low there. But nobody's there to steal anything.
Even the people who would normally break into your house when you're gone are at the football game.
They're at the game with you. They're at the game with you. There's no theft in Green Bay. Why? Because everyone's at the game. But that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the NFL. The beauty of baseball, as you pointed out, is that there could be nobody in the seats except for 8 people at a time. Yet the television revenue and radio revenue still drives. The NHL is a gate-driven business, and if you do not have butts in seats, you do not have Benjamins in the pocket. And that's the problem with the National Hockey League. They don't realize the shortcoming. And if you use the business analogy, that if a business is failing in market X, time over time, year over year, they are underperforming, you shut down that office. You try and relocate a certain amount of employees, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It could be 500 or it could be 5,000 people at the drop of a dime, get 2 months severance and say thank you very much. Exactly. And if you want to call yourself a business, treat it like a business.
Definitely. I'll tell you what, Lonnie, I do thank you for the insight. We're just about out of time here. So let me go ahead and also thank our sponsor, thepuckshopshere.com. Discount hockey gear available online. If you go there and you're already getting the best prices, but use the promo code InsideSports upon checkout, you get an additional 10% off. Not to mention free shipping on all orders over $75. So we're just about out. Remember, you can follow Lonnie on Twitter at TheSchwartz54. You can follow myself on Twitter at TheInsideSports. So Lonnie, any final words here before we wrap everything up?
I hate being wrong more than I like being right, so we'll see where the trades lie on February 27th and see who lands where. And if you and I are correct, more teams are not willing to gamble away too much of a future on the likes of Nash, and Zach Parise will remain a New Jersey Devil.
All right, perfect. Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us. So for Lonnie Schwartz, I'm Charles E. Smith, Jr. This has been Talkin Hockey, which is an Inside Sports production, and we'll see you all next week in the wake of the trade deadline.